Is alcohol good or bad for you? The answer is yes, no, maybe. The debate about alcohol's impact on health is heating up, and you can find many opinions on this topic everywhere you look, also here on YouTube. Social media doctors, real doctors, sober living influencers, and alcohol industry representatives are sharing their insights and are trying to sway your opinion, also by publishing false or misleading information. I know that this will be a controversial video, and I understand that people from both sides of the arguments will not necessarily like what I have to say, but I did not make this video to please abstainers or drinkers. Instead, I want to give you the truth about alcohol. We know for sure that excessive alcohol consumption is harmful, and we also know that it's better to drink nothing rather than drinking a bottle of vodka per day. We also know that humans prefer black or white answers as they make our decisions easier, and alcohol is often put into a box for that reason. However, the relationship between alcohol and health is complicated, and there is no clear answer when it comes to the question whether alcohol is good for you or not. A symbol that visualizes this complicated relationship is the J-shaped curve. Humans have consumed alcohol for thousands of years. In the case of wine, for more than 8,000 years. So we have a pretty good understanding of alcohol's impact on us, from making us more cooperative to allowing us to letting loose to killing us. The effects of alcohol on our general health and our longevity have been well documented over the decades, and the results show a general pattern. The J-shaped curve, or as I like to refer to it, the Nike swoosh. Bear with me here for one sec. When you collect the consumption data of a large cohort of people and plot the alcohol consumed on a daily basis, usually measured in standard drinks per day, against the risk of premature death, it becomes very clear that if you consume a lot of alcohol, your risk of premature death rises significantly. You might have an uncle who drank a shot of tequila and a bottle of wine per day and died on his 95th birthday, but he was clearly the exception, and I didn't find any scientist who disagrees with that. It is therefore also clear that if we don't consume any alcohol at all, our risk of premature death is much lower than if we consume a lot of alcohol. We would like to connect the two dots and say less is good, more is bad, but the story isn't that easy. However, over the decades, many studies have found that people who drink low to moderate amounts of alcohol actually live longer than people who don't consume any alcohol at all. Obviously, at some point, this effect disappears. As soon as you drink more than moderate levels, it will actually be again bad for you, worse for you than if you don't drink anything at all. But the people in this group drinking low to moderate amounts, they're actually doing better than the people who are not drinking any alcohol at all. Hence the J-shaped curve or the Nike swoosh. I've linked up several studies and papers that I'm referring to in this video below this video in the description in order to make it easier for you to fact check me. Moderate alcohol consumption appears to be beneficial when it comes to battling the #1 killer worldwide, coronary heart disease, but it also appears to protect from other diseases. Organizations looking after public health have generally not liked to promote this effect of low to moderate alcohol consumption, and even alcohol producers have not promoted this effect, in some cases because it is illegal in certain markets. In Germany, for example, it is illegal to promote alcoholic beverages using terms like easily digestible, bekömmlich, because it might suggest that alcohol has beneficial effects on your health, even though the data appears to show that. The rationale behind those laws appears to be that promoting alcohol's health benefits might encourage overconsumption, and I overall agree. It is not a bad idea to be critical of those large-scale observational studies. In the end, the data very much depends on the questions you asked and on the honesty of the respondents, and in the end you can only show correlations and not causations. So you might be able to see that there is a connection between your alcohol consumption and your life expectancy, but you cannot prove that your alcohol consumption has influenced your life expectancy for the better or the worse. On top of that, have you ever been asked by your doctor how much you drink? And have you given an honest answer? So I think most of those studies actually underreport the alcohol consumption. There are some scientists, most notably Tim Stockwell from Canada, that claim that the J-shaped curve does not exist. For his meta-analysis, he uses a small subset of studies, and even after discarding all of the data he does not like, his results do not show that drinking low amounts of alcohol is worse than drinking no alcohol at all. On top of that, he has been widely criticized for his practices and his ties to anti-alcohol organizations. It is important to remember that most studies that show the benefits as well as the drawbacks of alcohol consumption are not unequivocal, and you could probably selectively discard studies in order to make the risks of alcohol appear less pronounced. Many scientists I've heard from over the last few months would like to see a randomized controlled trial on the impact of alcohol on health. These trials are used by pharmaceutical companies in order to study the effects of drugs before they come to the market, and they are considered to be the gold standard when it comes to establishing causation between a treatment and the outcome. However, the last attempt for such a trial was shut down for political reasons. It was supposed to be financed by the alcohol industry, and having the producers pay for the study could have influenced the results, and therefore the study was shut down. I can understand the argument, but it appears to be normal that drug companies pay for the trials that will decide whether they can make millions or billions on a new pharmaceutical, and that is generally accepted. As of right now, no one else appears to be interested enough to pay for such a trial, and we therefore don't have a definitive answer to the question how alcohol impacts health. The general consensus, however, was that alcohol in moderation has beneficial effects on longevity. This is why it came as a shock when in January 2023, the World Health Organization, the WHO, came out with the following statement: "No level of alcohol consumption is safe for our health, and the risk to a drinker's health starts from the first drop of any alcoholic beverage." The statement followed the release of a new study that estimated that in 2017, light to moderate drinking, defined as 1 to 2 drinks per day, has actually caused 23,000 new cases of cancer in the EU. The WHO's study was published in the highly regarded publication The Lancet, and it showed that low to moderate amounts of alcohol might increase your cancer risk, especially for breast cancer. Of course, the same publications that previously wrote that alcohol is some kind of cure-it-all now reported that you will die if you drink any alcohol at all. It is, however, important to look at the data in detail. Light to moderate drinking here is defined as up to 1.5 liters of wine per week, 2 standard bottles, which is above current guidelines in many countries, especially for women. According to their data, this type of consumption was associated with 23,000 new cases of cancer in 2017. But those cases only made up 2.3% of all of the cases of cancer that they looked at. And almost half of those cases were actually cases of female breast cancer. So while it would be great to reduce that risk down to 0, that risk might actually be fairly low. It might go, depending on your genetic disposition, your gender, etc., from 10% risk to 11% risk. And for some of you, this might be completely unacceptable. But for me, this is definitely not a reason to stop drinking alcohol in moderation. It is also important to understand that based on the study, your risk is very different when you are a healthy male compared to a woman with a disposition to get breast cancer. Just like other studies that show that drinking alcohol might be good for your health, this study should also be looked at as an interesting indication that requires further study rather than a definitive proof for anything. This definitive statement by the WHO is also really strange because many products actually contain alcohol. Fruit juice, bananas, bread, and yogurt can all contain small amounts of alcohol. So if all alcohol is unsafe, are those products also unsafe? The statement from the WHO caused a lot of backlash from scientists showing the evidence that moderate alcohol consumption can bring. In the same publication, The Lancet, an editorial was published in April 23 that highlighted different studies that showed that low to moderate alcohol consumption, especially when drinking red wine, reduces the risk of cardiovascular diseases as well as diabetes. two of the main culprits when it comes to premature death in the developed world. It also highlighted the benefits that moderate alcohol consumption can have for arthritis patients. The answer of the WHO: crickets. The WHO's more activist approach of disregarding all of alcohol's benefits in order to have a clear message alcohol is bad has put pressure on governments in order to change their alcohol policies. This comes at a slightly weird time because alcohol consumption is actually at a very low level compared to the middle of the 20th century in many countries, especially here in Europe. One of the worst examples for the changing attitudes towards alcohol consumption were the proposed Canadian alcohol guidelines that dropped to 1 to 2 drinks per week for low-risk consumption. Even people that were on the panel coming up with those suggestions thought that they were too restrictive and that their definition for low-risk consumption was misleading. They calculated that you might lose 2 to 3 days in a lifetime based on those drinking habits, which is a level of false precision that makes a statistician laugh. One of the best comments on that topic came from Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge in the UK. He said on the BBC podcast The Food Chain that the evidence doesn't support that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. A beautiful quote from the podcast was, "There is no safe level of living, but no one recommends abstention." Professor Spiegelhalter also mentioned that drinking 1 drink per day, not 1 to 2 per week, 1 per day, comes at the same risk as watching television for 1 hour per day or eating 2 bacon sandwiches per week. But he also feels that calculating those risks on the basis of fairly shaky data is unnecessary. When it comes to alcohol consumption, there are many variables that are not fully understood, but alcohol is often looked at as this one thing. For example, consuming low alcohol drinks appears to be better than drinking spirits. And it also depends whether you drink all of the drinks that you're allowed to drink in a week in one sitting or spread it across the whole week, and whether you drink your alcohol with food or not. This should be no surprise for anyone, but drinking 2 glasses of wine over dinner appears to be better for you than drinking a shot of vodka on an empty stomach. So the science is by no means conclusive, and while there appears to be benefits to drinking alcohol at low to moderate levels, there appear to be also drawbacks. However, there are many people trying to claim that the science is set in stone on this topic, and one of the worst examples, in my opinion, is Andrew Huberman. Andrew David Huberman is an American neuroscientist and podcaster, and his podcast is one of the biggest in the world. In the first paragraph of his Wikipedia entry, it says that the podcast has attracted criticism for promoting poorly supported health claims, which is a statement I can confirm. His video, What Alcohol Does to Your Body, Brain and Health, has more than 7 million views, and in the video he goes through all of the problems he has identified with alcohol. The video is 2 hours long, and he spends a little more than 2 minutes on the chapter, Are There Any Positive Effects of Alcohol? In the chapter he mainly talks about the red herring resveratrol, which clearly doesn't have any positive impacts on your body when consumed through red wine, and then he talks about red wine in very small doses and that the positive effects are not well researched. If I can find a lot of peer-reviewed research that shows benefits of moderate alcohol consumption, then he should be able to find that information too. So why isn't he talking about it? In another interview for the Found My Fitness podcast, he again says that he's not anti-alcohol, and then he goes on to say that the data shows that if you drink between 0 and 2 drinks per week, you're probably fine, provided you're not an alcoholic. So first of all, I don't know whether there are many alcoholics around who consistently drink less than 3 drinks per week, but the statement is pretty ridiculous anyways. Why should alcohol be harmful if you drink 0 drinks per week? That said, maybe he just misspoke there. But then he goes on and says that if you drink more than 2 drinks per week, you might get problems with your gut microbiome, even though there's good research suggesting that moderate alcohol consumption might actually be beneficial for your gut microbiome, especially if you drink red wine. He also talks about a study from his field claiming that the research has found significant thinning of white and gray matter in the brain if participants drink more than 1 to 2 drinks per week, even though the study doesn't find that. Instead, that paper finds no significant decrease for people drinking 1 drink per day, a pretty big difference. But obviously, if you drink more and more, there will be a more significant decrease in white and gray matter. He also could have mentioned there that people who are drinking alcohol in moderation have a lower dementia risk compared to people who don't drink at all. Huberman was a guest on many other podcasts with large audiences, and he has repeated that claim over and over that more than 2 drinks per week are problematic and cause damage to your health. And I still haven't figured out where he has got that information from. I haven't found it. Andrew, if you're listening, let me know down in the comments. He might believe that by setting those unrealistic targets, he actually stops overconsumption. But I think just like those wino influencers who want to make people believe that drinking all day is fun, he just uses the wrong approach and is just misleading people. But in the end, I do not drink alcohol because of health benefits. I love wine because it enriches my life. It allows me to travel around the world and really immerse myself in this great cultural product. Alcohol also has other benefits. It's a social lubricant that makes human interactions a little more pleasant overall, even though we oftentimes only look at the bad sides of alcohol. Alcohol production is likely older than civilization, and some scientists believe that it's actually the reason why we settled down and formed a society. Göbekli Tepe, one of the oldest man-made sites built by Stone Age hunter-gatherers, also had huge vessels that were made for beer brewing. So it might have been beer rather than bread that got us interested in settling down and starting agriculture. I understand. One of the oldest evidences of alcohol production dates back 9,000 years and is from China. Jesus drank wine during the Last Supper. The old Greek term symposium actually means drinking party. And the signing of the Declaration of Independence was celebrated with Madeira wine. There are many reasons why alcohol has stayed relevant throughout this whole time. But the main reason is that it's a social lubricant, something that we can consume together that allows us to agree with each other or sometimes just bear one another. But I also understand that there's a limit and that I need to be careful with alcohol. I actually have this thing here at my house. It's an ethanol molecule, so alcohol, and it looks like a cute little dog. But I'm also aware that this can turn into a wild beast that rips apart everything I have. So I'm mindful. So what is the way forward? I think first of all, we need to be honest about the facts. We need to accept that there are some benefits to low to moderate alcohol consumption and that there are also some drawbacks. And for sure, it's not good to drink too much. Policymaking should be informed by the data. And fortunately, we know quite a lot about ways how to tackle the problem with alcohol. So at the extreme end, we had prohibition at the beginning of the 20th century in the US, Canada, and Scandinavia. And the results were pretty clear. People still wanted to drink, and therefore legal alcohol consumption just turned into illegal alcohol consumption, causing many different problems and leading to, amongst other things, the rise of the mafia. There's still some places in the world where alcohol is prohibited, like for example Iran, but I don't think you want to live there. There are also examples of countries where alcohol distribution is strongly regulated. In Sweden, for example, they have the system Bolaget, a state-run monopoly that controls pretty much all of the alcohol distribution. Alcohol promotion and price dumping are forbidden in Sweden, and it's their goal to limit access to alcohol and limit the harmful effects of alcohol. In the retail sector, alcohol can almost only be purchased through the monopoly shops, where they try not to sell you another bottle of wine. This appears to work in a way. The shops are actually quite nice. Entry-level products are pretty expensive, while the more high-quality products are more reasonably priced, steering you to buy less but higher quality stuff. But when it comes to achieving the monopoly's results, the system, which is very restrictive and complex, actually doesn't produce great results. When you look at the data from the WHO on the alcohol consumption per capita in Sweden, it is only slightly below the EU average, which is not very impressive considering their very restrictive alcohol policy. but they are doing better than many countries when it comes to heavy episodic drinking. However, Sweden is doing far worse when it comes to the consumption that is the real problem. Alcohol use disorders and alcohol dependencies are far above the European average and a lot higher than in my home country, Germany, where alcohol policy is relatively liberal and consumption is pretty high. Another country where many of you come from is the US. Their legislation varies a lot from state to state, but overall it's more restrictive than most countries over here in Europe. The minimum drinking age in the US is pretty high at 21. They have some states that have monopoly-like structures, and they have also dry counties where the sale of alcohol is forbidden. They've also implemented some measures that are currently being discussed here, like warning labels on alcohol containers. Again, the per capita alcohol consumption in the US is not low or high. It's exactly the average of the European alcohol per capita consumption. But when it comes to problematic alcohol consumption, the situation is just completely different. Even though it's much more difficult to purchase alcohol in the US compared to Germany, they have a far higher level of alcohol use disorders, which is almost double of that of Germany, and 7.7% of the population has an alcohol dependence. That's more than double of what we have in Germany. So this data actually doesn't show that stricter regulation correlates with a better handling of alcohol. And I actually fear that if we get stricter with alcohol, we push it out of the social space and into the homes where people tend to overconsume, not being checked by friends and relatives around the dinner table. So what would be a good example then? The answer to this question, just like the answer to many questions, is be more like Italy. Well, you don't want their politics or their infrastructure or their bureaucracy, but the Italians know how to drink. Even though Italy is known as a country where alcohol is everywhere and wine is an important part of every meal, their per capita alcohol consumption is actually one of the lowest in Europe. Their levels of alcohol use disorders is very low, and the alcohol dependence is at 0.6% of the population. Sweden's is at 5.1%. 2/3 of the alcohol that is being consumed is wine. 1/4 of the consumption is beer, and there's only a small share of spirits consumption, and Italians mainly drink their alcohol with food. When I was younger, I was surprised to see young Italians get together around the table, eating something and drinking a few glasses of wine alongside their meal, while I was still drinking beer behind the gas station. It might be difficult to make the world more Italian, but we can still try to follow their example. First of all, we should accept that alcohol is part of our society and that we won't be able to get rid of it. Secondly, you should follow the guidelines set out by your government or by governments of your neighboring countries. And you should also try to build in a few days per week where you don't drink any alcohol at all. Have your drinks over dinner and share them with friends and family in order to get the best out of this experience and live a joyful life. Of course, I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving you any medical advice. That's just the way I like to live my life. But if you have any further questions, go see your doctor. When it comes to dealing with alcohol as an industry professional, let me share a little story with you that touched me. In an interview with the I'll Drink to That podcast, Jason Lett, co-owner of the Eyrie Vineyards, talked about this moment at a New Year's Eve party at home when he got drunk. His father, the winemaker back then at the estate, took him to the side and said, "Jason, I noticed you went a little over the line there." And he went on to say, "Always remember that wine is sacrament. And I never want to see you drunk again." So here's a winemaker, an alcohol industry insider, teaching his son about a respectful relationship with alcohol. Wine is holy. We consumed it in the past in order to feel closer to the gods, and it can make us feel great. But it can also destroy us if we fly too close to the sun. So we should treat it with the respect, reverence, and caution it deserves. So don't drink too much in order to stay thirsty.